give a... There it is. I hereby call this meeting of Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for the invocation and pledge of allegiance. This evening we have Pastor Ryan Liebert from Grace and Truth Church. Pastor?
Well, first of all, thank you so very much for the invitation to come and pray before the meeting. My name is Ryan, and I'm from Grace and Truth Church, Cincinnati. We are located right there on 2037 Cortland Avenue, just off Montgomery Road. Actually, our church was first founded in 1790. Can you believe that? And then we recently moved to Norwood from Hyde Park, where we were located previously. So if any of y'all would be interested in visiting us, we'd love to have you. Our services are at 10:30 on Sunday, and there's also a Sunday school at 9:30 a.m. So to begin, I'd like to read a portion of Scripture. That's from Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 to 11. This is the Word of God. Doing nothing from selfish ambition or vain glory, but with humility of mind regarding one another as more important than yourselves. Not merely looking out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this way of thinking in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although existing in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, by being made in the likeness of men. Being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has also highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. Would you please pray with me? Father in heaven, indeed we come before you, the living and true God. There is no God besides you. You are the one and only true God. And we come before you, having read this beautiful passage of Scripture about your dear Son, Jesus Christ. Lord, you know all of us. You know all of us better than we even know ourselves. And Lord, you've revealed the truth of sin. Sin in this world. It doesn't take much to look around the world and observe that sin is a reality in the world that we live in, even a reality in our own selves. But Lord, you sent Jesus Christ into the world. You sent him into the world as a man to live a life that we couldn't live and to die the death that we deserved, so that by believing in him, all who trust in him would have forgiveness of sins and have eternal life. Thank you, Lord, for the promise of your gospel. Lord, I thank you so much for the city council here this evening. And Lord, I do pray that you would bless them, that they would be blessed with wisdom, and that indeed you would guide their decision-making, guide the conversations. May it be pleasing to you. Lord, you ask us to pray for our leaders. Lord, I pray for each leader who is here tonight, and I just ask that you would tend to them as a loving Father and guide them to come to know your Son, Jesus Christ. And that as they're serving the people of Norwood, you'd be pleased just to bless them, bless the community, and may this night be pleasing, very well pleasing to you. Lord, we look to you. Our hope is in you. Thank you for your dear Son. Please bless this meeting. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen,
Here.
Mrs. Hoover,
Here.
Ms. Royce,
Here.
Mr. Kelch,
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Here.
Mr. Thompson. Here. Mr. Braden.
We have 6 members present, 1 absent member. Moving on to item E, amendment of agenda. Please be patient. We have several items. Beginning with item F, minutes of previous meeting. We are going to remove that from the meeting this evening. Item M1 and M2, we have revised copies this evening. Item M5, we are adding an appropriations ordinance, ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023, and declaring an emergency. And then we are adding item M6, it's a resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the general fund public lands and buildings contractual services 1001-0911-5200 to cover the cost of invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $10,171.88 and declaring an emergency. And item M7, resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the Clerk of Council Contractual Services Fund 1001-0200-57200 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $4,806.90 and declaring an emergency. Covered. That's it. Ms. Hoover.
Make a motion, we amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to amend the agenda as stated. Mr. Thompson.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to special presentations. This evening, we have Mr. Michael Outrich from OKI. Sir.
Thank you all. Let me just see really quickly. Is there a way to advance this slide? There we go.
Save that.
Thank you so much.
Can I clear that
Is
first?
that an option? I'm not sure. Is that an option?
There we go.
So, all right.
Do you want it in slideshow mode?
Yes, please. Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Outrich. I'm a senior planner, demographer with OKI Regional Council of Governments. And today, thank you, Susan, for inviting me in. And it's a pleasure to be here. This October evening, it's warm today, too. Surprised. I'm going to be talking a little bit about kind of what I'll cover about our population and employment projections and modeling that we do every 5 years. It informs our travel demand model and our long-range transportation plan for the region. Maybe talk a little bit more about how we do that, talk about regional trends, Hamilton County, then talk about Norwood. I have to set the stage a little bit more kind of larger, broader picture, so that way we can get kind of a little bit more understanding on how all these numbers have come about and kind of where we go from here. So I'll be talking about this past and kind of going forward, what we kind of see. And then I'll have time for questions at the end. So as I'd mentioned previously, it informs our travel demand model for future years, forecasting to 2050, and our long-range transportation plan, which also goes to 2050. In this document, it talks about freight and a variety of other different transportation modes, as well as kind of trends we see with regards to traffic and congestion, and kind of where we see people growing, what region, where we see people moving to, and all sorts of trends. And we update that every 5 years. So kind of talk a little bit more about population forecasting. So I look kind of over the last 20 years for areas and communities. What have we seen? Population change, household size, children, births, deaths, migration, housing, interest rates regarding mortgages and loans. You know, looking at housing trends and vacancy and a variety of other things. This is just a summation of them all. We look at a lot more. And then we also pull in information currently on kind of zoning and land use in the community. Is there available land to build or redevelop? Are there areas where we see redevelopment occurring on underused sites, brownfields, gray fields, and so on? And then we kind of look at building permits and things that have recently completed. What do we see? So we kind of pull all that stuff together as a way to kind of forecast population. When it comes to employment, we talk about looking at a regional scale by sector. So you have transportation and warehousing as a sector. You have agriculture. You have professional healthcare, social assistance, hotels, retail, variety of other different economic sectors. And we look at the trends in those. Are industries growing? Are they declining? Kind of what do we see? And then also overall trends in employment. Right now we're at a historical low with unemployment, and so that's a factor. That's pretty interesting. And then we pull in current information on what does the Labor Department project for industries. Kind of what do they see kind of going forward? What industries are going to grow? What are they going to decline? And then kind of look at industry shares within communities themselves and kind of over the last 10 years, what industries have grown, what have declined. Are there new locations where employers are moving into? Are they redeveloping existing sites? And kind of what do we kind of see for that? And that kind of gives us information on how we go forward when it comes to employment forecasts. So some regional trends. This is our OKI serves the 8-county region. So there are 4 counties in Ohio, 3 counties in northern Kentucky, and 1 county in Indiana. And so we look overall, start at a broad picture here. What do we see? So we see the region workforce and our population is continuing to age. We see people having less children. There's less births. We're not seeing the mothers that are birthing children are having them at later years. And we're seeing an elevated mortality. So the COVID-19 pandemic really elevated mortality, but we've kind of seen that stay elevated. And there's a variety of other reasons for that as to why we see deaths still over what they were before the pandemic. Some of that has to deal with deaths of despair, so overdoses, suicide, all of those kinds of not so good things. Those things have remained kind of elevated since before the pandemic. Now we still see it. We look at growth in housing permits. So we've seen a shift from single-family homes developers are building to multifamily and denser projects, catering towards folks who are more likely to rent. And so that's one interesting thing to note. And then we've also noticed a strong pause in new construction with regards to interest rates that have gone up and building costs and other things have gone up. Since a lot of that capital has been kind of taken out of the market, we've seen a slowdown in new construction. Regionally speaking, people are kind of pushing pause on their multifamily projects, and rents have actually kind of stopped increasing. So that's one thing to note. And our region continues to gain population and jobs, and will continue to do so. For some reason, we're kind of a little bit below our pre-pandemic employment for the region, but we're still growing with regards to employment and population. Some things about Hamilton County here. So I've kind of outlined Norwood in the black there on the map. That's where Norwood is, right there. And so what we see in growth areas, we've seen a lot of greenfield development, infill development, and office conversions. So office to retail, or residential conversions, particularly in office parks. We've kind of seen a conversion downtown in Springdale, and a couple of other communities have kind of seen some conversions there, which is new. That's new. It's a new trend. And then areas where we've kind of seen decline, areas where we've seen kind of aging neighborhoods, areas that have already built out, and there really isn't room for new housing. In the housing market right now, we're not really seeing redevelopment in those communities. So those are kind of areas where we've kind of seen some population loss, and our distressed urban core areas. So we've kind of seen that. And all the areas that have declined in the last 10 years in population are in red or in the warmer colors, and the areas that have gained population are in the green. Norwood's pretty stable when we look at this. We have one census tract that lost a little bit of population, and one near Xavier that has gained, and then the rest are relatively stable. And so that's good news. We look at residential building permits, all of these dots. The larger the dot, the bigger the project. These are all of the projects since 2020 that have either been completed, are currently under construction, or proposed. As you can see, the core there around downtown Cincinnati, there's a lot of dots there. There's a decent amount of dots around Oakley, and that includes the Factory 52 site here in Norwood. And then a lot of greenfield development in Harrison Township, or the city of Harrison, and some of the northwestern portions of the county. And then Springdale, we've seen the other Tri-County Mall site and a few other sites there that are poised for redevelopment as well. So those are kind of what we see with all of these dots. But notice the dots are larger than the smaller dots, which means a lot more multifamily projects are being built or proposed. Some other things to note. So here's the caveat to my presentation. We're restricted by the Ohio State Data Center from a contract we signed in 1972, which caps the number of people we can add for the county, which impacts what we can add locally to communities. And so the Ohio State Data Center has set that cap at 15,415 people in Hamilton County by 2050, a growth of 1.8%. I can't deviate from that number. I have to stick with that number. So that's unfortunate. But one thing we note is that in the dashed blue line on there, the lower line in the graph there, that was the previous projection for that was taken back in 2015 for Hamilton County. And they've revised that up and kind of flattened it going forward. And there's reasons for that, which I'll get to here in a moment. So overall, population growth for Hamilton County has been reduced, but it's still growing. So that's good. Again, we're contractually restricted to adhere to those numbers. There's leeway in terms of where I could put those people within the county. But yeah, we're kind of capped at that. Building permits are up, again, with multifamily growth. That's a growth signal. Persistent outward migration. So that's one thing we've noticed. We've seen, since the pandemic has started, we've seen folks kind of moving out of the county. We've seen younger folks moving in and empty nesters moving in, but families with children and stuff like that kind of moving out. During the pandemic, they were taking advantage of the decreased interest rates, which decreases your mortgage rate, and so they were buying a bigger home, a little bit more space. But it still remains to be seen what trend's going to win out. We also know that seniors within the region have actually migrated to the Sun Belt and other counties outside of the region altogether. But we've also had inward migration of younger workers and college students. So it's kind of like it's a big mix here. It's kind of hard to see which one's going to win out. The pandemic really made it hard for demographers to forecast things because, it's been over 100 years since we had a massive pandemic that messed things up. And so it makes it kind of difficult. But this is kind of what we've seen since things have kind of settled down. We've seen a declining share of those under 18, so less children, and growing numbers of seniors in the county, which has implications for future growth. Our workforce is aging as well, and then I've already talked about the employment piece and kind of our excess in deaths, which has affected the growth rate, the natural growth rate. So within our region, going forward, a lot of our growth is going to require or kind of rely on inward migration from outside the region. And so we'll have to see how that plays out kind of going forward. All right, now on to Norwood. A little bit more kind of historical data in terms of how that sets the baseline for how we kind of look at going forward. So the first column of bars on the left are those under 18, and then we have the next cohort of bars, which is those 18 to 34, then 35 to 64, and then the seniors on the right, those three columns on the right. And so one of the things we've noticed, and I wonder if I have a laser pointer. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. That's okay. We're all good. So the first three columns on the left there, the first three bars, those are the population under 18. And we've noticed a substantial decline within the city of Norwood in the last 20 years of those under 18. We've seen a decline in those that are ages 35 to 64, and a slight growth in those since 2010 in seniors, and a steady and then really sharp increase in those 18 to 34. So that's mostly your college students, your younger folks that are kind of moving in or starting their first job, your young professionals, and other such. And so that one's kind of interesting because Norwood's unique in that a lot of other communities in the region don't have this type of trend. They have decline actually in that cohort and a much more substantial growth in seniors. And so it makes Norwood pretty unique in that regard. We'll kind of go forward here. A little bit more about households and children. So the orange bar are those households that do not have children, and the blue are those that do have children. And so you see we've kind of seen this steady decline in those households with children since 2020. but an overall growth in households since 2010. So that means that households are getting smaller. So that's interesting. You can see kind of in the table here too. Average household size has gone from 3.2% or 3.2 persons per household in 2000 to 2.14 in 2010. So an overall 7% increase in households since 2010. So that's a good thing. Talking a little bit more about household types, and I apologize for looking on this computer. You can see it a little bit better. The blue pie slice there are those that are non-family households. So those are people who are living alone, those that live with roommates or unrelated individuals. And that slice of the pie has grown pretty sharply since 2000. It was 45% of households in 2000, and now it's 57% of households. So the majority of households in Norwood now are either single individuals or those that are not yet married, or maybe couples that are unmarried, or they're roommates or unrelated individuals sharing household expenses. So yeah, and again, an overall increase in households of 912 households since 2000. So again, even though the population has declined since 2000 and then slightly recovered since 2010, we've seen a much more larger increase in households because household sizes are getting smaller. And then married couples with children, that one was the cohort that declined the most, the decrease of 552 households or 36%. So again, talking more about the growth in that first blue pie chart slice there. And I'll talk a little bit more about the labor force. Population in the labor force has increased 5% between 2000 and 2010. So you got more folks in the workforce in Norwood. You had a minimum in 2010, so we've kind of turned the corner there. So that's a good thing. Labor force participation rate continues to increase as well, and employment is at historical lows. Now that point is very, very important because when I kind of go through a little bit more in the future projecting labor force forward, we can't stay at historical low unemployment forever, and so we have to kind of increase that to get back to more of a normal kind of standpoint. An unemployment rate in Norwood was 4.9% in 2020. Talking a little bit more about school enrollment within the city of Norwood. One of the things that I find really interesting is the nursery school, preschool, and kindergarten cohorts have seen a very sharp increase in school enrollment since 2010. So prior to this, you had a steady decline in all cohorts from 2000 to 2010, except for college students. But now you've seen a change in that. So you're starting to see more young children within the city. So that's interesting. And it'll be interesting to watch over the next 10 years to see if that cohort kind of goes into the primary school, the elementary school, and then into high school. We kind of see that kind of matriculation up because then that would actually increase enrollment within Norwood schools. And we've seen a very strong increase in those going to college or graduate school. That also is in line with why we have a large non-family household increase. A lot of folks in that group. Now, talking about housing prices in Norwood. These are inflation adjusted as well. So, the value of the dollar is the same on the right as it is on the left. And so in the middle there, you see kind of the impact of the recession, the Great Recession, when housing prices kind of fell down. And then they went up, and then they went way up, and now they're kind of stabilized. The reasonings for that, the really market increase is really due to low supply in housing, people buying homes and then bidding and bidding and bidding, impact of investors. So you got a lot of people, investors kind of pouring capital into homes for rentals, which further pushes up price. And then you had low interest rates in 2020 through 2022. Those basement level interest rates that I hope we'll see at some point in the future, but I don't know. That's where you saw a really strong increase in housing prices, and then now we've really increased the interest rates. 8% on a 30-year mortgage now, and so our prices have flatlined. They haven't gone down, they haven't gone up. They've kind of stayed the same, and you see some seasonal adjustments in there as to why it's summertime. It's a little bit more expensive than in the winter because you've got more people in the market. So that's why there's a little bit of a bubble there. But prices have stabilized. And so it remains to be seen kind of what happens going forward. But housing prices now in Norwood have been the most they've ever been, going back to at least 2000 when you adjust it for inflation. Talking about total population. So now I've given you all the information from a historical standpoint, and now I'm going to kind of go forward in terms of what we see. So we are going from 2000 on the left there to 2020, and then now we're kind of seeing this steadily little increase in population. Now the reason for this, population projected to increase 0.8% through 2050. The reasoning for this is we're seeing a growing population in seniors, and we've seen kind of population loss in some neighborhoods kind of exceeding what the gains would be from Factory 52 and other investment. So we've kind of seen this, it's kind of slowed the growth down. And so it remains to, obviously we'll update this again in 5 years to see it, as Factory 52 builds out and then the other sites, if other things come online for housing in a substantial manner, then we'll probably revise these upwards. But that's part of the reason why we've kind of seen this. So it's, again, kind of looking historically relatively stable, kind of carrying forward, still relatively stable with a slight upward trajectory. Talking about those under 18, that's a cohort that's going to grow pretty rapidly once we get past 2030. Again, this is kind of talking about those folks that are, nursery, school, primary, kindergarten age, kind of matriculating upwards, and then more families moving into the district going forward. And so we'll see kind of a steady increase again in that, 26% through 2050. Initially, as I mentioned kind of a bit back, this slide here, the reason why we don't see a growth initially in that population under 18 is because we've seen still declines in those in the elementary schools as well as those going in high school. And so as those guys age out, we'll kind of see that trend reverse. So that's why there's a bit of a delay there, but it'll go upwards after that. We'll see a total number of households again will continue to increase going forward. And then average household size will reach a minimum in 2030 and then kind of start to go back up from there. And again, that's mostly to the aging cycle of the population in Norwood as it is. Talking a little bit more about those in the labor force. So as we know, our workforce is aging. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we kind of see this slightly drawn down in the population in those employed, as well as a return to a higher level of unemployment. We'll see a decline in labor force projected. I know this looks a lot more serious than it is in terms of the graphic, in terms of the way the axis is done, but I needed to be able to show the numbers. The reasoning for this is returning to higher levels of unemployment, a little bit more average. And then we'll see an increase of those going to post-secondary options. So they'll be going to school more, learning a trade, going, kind of furthering their education more. So we continue to see that. And then increase in households with children will still keep some folks out of the workforce. And so that, because childcare is really expensive. I'm sure some folks know. And so that's part of it too. As we have more families with children in the city, we may have some more folks being kept out of the workforce to take care of their children. And then this is looking forward for Norwood City Schools within their projections, a minimum in 2030, and then a gain from there on. And then we see, in the orange there are our high schools, our high school growing there beyond there too. And then our elementary schools will grow first. And then talking about post-secondary projected enrollment, again, trend more college students, more folks at Xavier, other local universities. We'll see that growth by 26% in 2050. Talking a little bit more about jobs in Norwood by sector, we'll see a slight decline in jobs. This is partially due to automation. With regards to our retail sector, you got a lot of self-checkouts, you got a lot of that stuff now, click lists and other things kind of dwindling the number of workforce in retail. And then you have automation side of folks in manufacturing, and those are two really big industries in Norwood. And so that's one thing to note. And then we'll see a growth in sectors with regards to education, professional and technical, accommodation and food service, healthcare and social assistance are sectors that will grow in Norwood. They're projected to gain 1,000 jobs in Norwood by 2050. So we kind of see between those two sectors relatively, again, overall bigger picture, relatively stable. Any questions? No, that was a lot. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Mrs. Hoover?
I'd like to thank you very much. I heard his overarching presentation at an OKI meeting. few weeks ago, and was really excited to roll up the sleeves and get more information for how Norwood is going to be impacted. I'm curious, in particular, in terms of the workforce or the economy. Would you mentioned that the light manufacturing and retailers going to go down. Would you have recommendations in terms of what we should be paying attention to? Is that not your pay? Is that not even above your pay grade? Is that a different department altogether?
That one's a little trickier because every community handles it differently. The best I can do is kind of just say, hey, these are overall trends in the sectors. If you have a lot of those types of employees in your community, think about diversification or kind of job training programs that can continue to recruit folks in the industries that will grow. You guys have a lot of former manufacturing sites that are around. It remains to be seen kind of how those will be repurposed. That's kind of the big thing is, older shopping centers, the hotel down the street, those type of sites. Once I kind of get information on what the plans are for that, then I can refine the numbers and have a clearer picture on what will happen going forward. It's a very interesting community because, with the Factory 52 site, with the 351 apartment units that are going on, and then all of the other things that are going in there too, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that radiates outward into the rest of the community. Yeah, I'm excited to see what you all do.
In terms of diversification, how diverse do you feel like our economy is?
Better than it was. I would say it's better than it was. Before, when you go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, manufacturing was it. You had a lot of major manufacturing employers in your community, and steadily over time, those employers dwindled their employment, and then they laid off people, or they moved their jobs to other more competitive regions outside of the region or into the region and other communities entirely. And so it's kind of tricky to say in terms of going forward with, kind of looking at those sites. But, a lot of those factories, they had good bones. And that's really attractive for certain folks that want to repurpose those things because, even the housing stock, when you got before 1940 with the tract home developments, which Norwood's housing stock is a lot of really nice, old, stable, really well-built homes. It remains to be seen kind of how those have a lot of value in and of themselves. I live in a home that's put together with popsicle sticks pretty much when you really peel back everything. But yeah.
What other communities might we look at to see how, they have changed? Communities that are similar to ours that are maybe further along the same path we might be going?
Yeah.
Is there any good comparisons there?
I would say locally, the best comparison is actually St. Bernard. Just down the way there. They're very similar housing stock, a lot of manufacturing still, in terms of that. That would be the best local case, I would say, for a local community. But you could look at literally any of the other cities, Middletown, other ones that had former manufacturing facilities that have kind of had to figure out how to rework those. Middletown would be another good community to look at. Very similar kinds of industries at one point too. Just a lot of those older communities that had a lot of manufacturing, how they're reusing their sites and what they're doing with them.
Thank you.
The big asset you guys have is Xavier, right around the corner, and a lot. You're centrally located. There's a lot of pressure. You saw it with the population increase or with the price in housing. There's been an increase in demand and desire to really want to be here. And so, yeah, it's exciting because I don't know what y'all will do, but I look forward to finding out.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Outreach.
Thank you. You want me to take this back up?
Sure. Next, we'll move on to public hearings. I hereby call this public hearing to order. H1, the following item will appear on the agenda as a public hearing on Tuesday, October 24th, 2023 at 7:30 p.m. in the Norwood City Hall Council Chambers, 4645 Montgomery Road, Norwood, Ohio, 45212. Proposed ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning relating to various chapters to promote clarity and consistency and policy interpretation, organizing various definitions and terms, processing minor PUD applications, porous pavement, minor accessory equipment structures, townhouses, electrical vehicle charging stations, and other related changes. This is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to voice an opinion is welcome to attend the meeting and to speak for or against the proposed text amendment. The proposed text amendment is available for review in the Norwood Building Department, Room 101 of Norwood, Ohio, Norwood City Hall, Norwood, Ohio, Montgomery, Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Do we have anyone that would like to speak in favor? Please come forward, state your name. Seeing none, we'll move on. Would anyone like to speak against the measure? Please come forward, state your name.
My name is Andrew Moore. I live at 4211 Forest Avenue. I am mostly for this measure, but I do have a couple of things I'm concerned about. First of which is the fact that basically this provision would ban EV charging stations above 6 units on Montgomery Road because of the setback requirement of being 200 feet or more. The other thing that I am concerned about is the fact that the provision contains language about directional signs. There is no language anywhere else in our zoning code with regard to directional signs. Either directional signs are a problem and they shouldn't be allowed, or they're perfectly fine and it should not be just restricted to EV charging stations. Those are my only two thoughts on this. I just thought it was something I should point out for you guys to consider, and I'll cede the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else that would like to come forward and speak against the measure? Seeing none, then I hereby close this public hearing. Moving on to item I, request to address council. I have several this evening to request council. The first one is Mr. Michael Krivka. Please come forward, state your name.
I'm Michael Krivka. We got that down? Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, council members, and the people of Norwood, thank you for inviting me to come before you today. I want to especially thank Councilwoman Hoover for her friendship and for her asking me to come. I'm here this evening to speak to you about the 988 initiative and the desperate need for more awareness for mental health services. According to the CDC, 1 in 5 Americans will experience a mental health crisis in a given year. That means someone you know, someone you love. They're suffering at the hands of their own mental health. We as a collective community know that our citizens are suffering, but are often lost when it comes to taking action. We have made it difficult for someone to speak up about their issues, and even more difficult for them to ask for help. The Mental Health Foundation tells us that only 1 in 8 adults in the United States receives treatment for their mental health issues. The COVID-19 pandemic did nothing to help this number, and the effects are being seen across the board. KFF reports that 32.3% of adults in the United States report having mental health issues in this given year. Out of those who are 18 to 24 years old, the number changes to 50. We cannot continue to have these kind of statistics in our younger members of society. Their mental health issues stiffen their ability to live the life that they aim to have. This is why we need to have these types of conversations. It is terrifying to think that our friends and family members do not feel comfortable enough asking us for help. So we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? We can do what we're doing right now. Talk about it. There's a powerful stigma that comes with dealing with mental health. Those who talk about it are deemed to be over-emotional. too sensitive, or even melodramatic. The truth is they are brave. I want to share a story about a friend of mine with you. My friend Finn has dealt with mental health issues since he was a child. When the lockdown occurred, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He didn't know what to do with this information, and he relied on his friends. We helped as much as we could, but masks and restrictions made that very tricky. When he got COVID, he went off the deep end. I didn't hear from him for a few days, and when I did, it was his mother telling me that he had been admitted to the hospital and was receiving treatment. I watched my friend lose his mind in a matter of 72 hours. Finn is the strongest person I know, and dealing with his bipolar disorder is not an easy ordeal, and it only amplified his temptations and his addictive traits. Since then, he has been to rehab twice, 2 different colleges, had 3 AA sponsors, and lived in 5 different states. Let me be crystal clear, that is no way to live. Now, Finn lives in Maine. He works at a resort cutting down trees and training young kids on how to ski. He's never been happier. He's stable, and his medication is finally helping him. I'm so proud of my friend. He's the reason I talk about mental health issues and why I'm here today, because it hits so close to home. Finn's story is not a one-off about someone who is down on their luck. This is a young man with a life ahead of him and very little resources looking to help him. Last year, when I first came to the Cincinnati area, I learned about the 988 hotline. The 988 hotline is a national network of local crisis centers that provides free and confidential emotional support to people in suicidal crisis or emotional distress 24 hours a day, and this service is free of charge, and there's a texting option as well. There's a lot of good that can be done with 988, but there's still more to be done. United Way reports that out of the 50 states, Ohio is the 7th most likely to not ask for help when it is needed. Our centers have this data, and they're working on it. The Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services says that there have been 8,793 average calls for the 988 hotline from the Ohio area code alone, including veterans and Spanish-speaking calls routed to specialized national call centers from July of 2022 to May of 2023. As I stand before you today, I want to ask you to look at the 988 hotline. Find the great things in it. Don't listen to me. Find your own data, your own stories of those whose lives have been affected by mental health issues. I ask that you help me in raising advocacy for mental health programs and the 988 hotline. This is an important task, and I ask that you help me in this pursuit. As they often say, there is hope. There is a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next request to address council, Mr. Andrew Moore.
I already addressed council,
Okay.
so we're good. Thank you.
Did Finley want to speak? Is he? Yeah. We have Finley Moore.
I'd actually prefer Finn. Because that's my nickname, and I like it's easier to spell. I have a joke for you. What do you call a woodsman? A sleepy woodsman.
What do you call a sleepy woodsman?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
A slumberjack.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Finn. Our next request to address council, Bishop Sonny James. Bishop James.
Well, good evening.
That was cute. I am really, really excited. This Saturday, as many of you know, we are going to have a very historic March celebration right here in great Norwood, Ohio. If anyone has questioned how far this community has come, my encouragement to them would be to come and to walk with us this Saturday, the 28th of October, starting at 5 p.m. If you do not have this on your calendar, please put it on your calendar. Let me tell you, we have a host of high-profile individuals that will be here and they will walk with us. If you really want to make a difference, I encourage all of you to come and walk with us to show not just Norwood, but other communities that no matter where you've been, no matter what anybody has said about you or people you care about, when we stand together as one race, as one people, as one family, our representation can speak louder than any words to other communities across the country, perhaps across the globe. But I encourage everyone watching or listening right now, if you want to get excited of something that's right here in our own city, our own surrounding communities, I want you to go to YouTube and I want you to search trailer, a fire you can't put out. And when you see Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth's face, click on and for 5 minutes and 11 seconds, take a look at the trailer that represents the film that this march will be included in. Now, the Bible tells me to give honor to whom honor is due. I walked into Chambers tonight just thinking I was going to acknowledge the march again. I have, for some reason, getting slow in my old age, I have not mentioned our newly brought on Chief of Police, Chief Sumner. And I want to publicly thank him. I want to publicly thank Noah. I want to publicly thank each of you. But tonight as I came in, my mayor handed me a piece of paper and said, here's the proclamation that you asked for. And I asked him, I said, you're trying to make me cry. And he says, no, I'm not. And I said, oh yeah, you are, because I'm about to cry. Guys, we can do a lot of good to show people who we are as a community. So anyone watching or listening, as my time runs out, please go to your pastors, go to your other community leaders, go to your civic organizations, your football teams, any of your sport activities, and come with us on Sherman Avenue, right across from Walgreens, and celebrate with us to show the world how awesome we are as a people. Not as a black people, not as a Hispanic people, not as a white people. And there are some others, but my time is running out. I want to show my peers how awesome we are. And Norwood is not the old Norwood. Norwood can really make a huge difference across the globe. And I can't wait to get on that bullhorn and say, Norwood, Ohio! And have everyone celebrate with us. I also want to give a special shout out to Alani Wright and those at Xavier University that have walked with me and really pressed the way to help make this event a success. And to all of our city leaders, those that can be there and those aren't. But please come with us Saturday, the 28th of October at 5 p.m. God bless you all. Be well. Peace.
Thank you, Bishop James. That concludes all of our requests to address council. We'll move on to item M1, introductory read of ordinances and resolutions. M1, ordinance approving the proposed text amendments to Part 11 of the codified ordinance of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Ordinance Amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code, relating to various chapters to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, organizing various definitions and terms, processing minor PUD applications, porous pavement, minor accessory equipment structures, townhouses, electrical vehicle charging stations, and other related changes. Mr. Thompson.
I would move that we have the first reading of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to have the first reading of the ordinance. May I have a second? Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
I'd suggest one reading. I will suggest one reading for the next one too, just because we didn't get a hold of this until after 5 o'clock today and haven't had time to review completely. So not prepared to vote on this tonight myself.
Anyone else? Mrs. Franzen.
I would agree with that, and I also wanted to know if the administration had anything to add to what Mr. Moore had brought up with the electric vehicle charging station stuff.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, the general public. Yeah, I think it's a valid concern. It was definitely something that was discussed probably for a good 10 months with regards to the Planning Commission. What I will do is discuss it with the chair of the Planning Commission tomorrow, and we can look at that. Now, I do say with regards to having that fairly robust separation from Montgomery, there was some logic to it just to ensure that larger parking facilities would at least be well separated from that. But it's something we can kind of revisit and at least, if there's an alternative, or at least come back to you with a better statement as to some of the history for that. So one thing I would like to applaud Mr. Murr. So he was actually the one that kind of initiated the whole thing. So I think definitely he's rather passionate about it and also has some experience with it. So definitely, at least on that element alone, I think it's fair for us to at least take a look at it.
And I did have a question. I was thinking specifically of the parking structure right across the street. So with the current language, if someone would want to put EV charging stations in that parking structure, would that be allowed or disallowed by this code?
Yeah, we'll revisit it. I think it was when we were going through that, including, the PLK site for the,
Right.
hotel, et cetera. It's something that, we'll look at future redevelopment sites, and we have other ones as you progress down Montgomery. So I think it's just a fine balancing act in terms of looking at what could be redeveloped as well, so.
Thank you. Yeah, I figure if we're just doing one reading, I think there's plenty of time to get those changes made. I had one logistical question as far as if these changes are made, do you need to have another public hearing on it, or is it something that's?
My belief, and we have solicitor tonight, if there's going to be a substantial change to the text or how the policy is read, or if we had, let's say, a zoning map change that would include some new lands, definitely that's deserving of having a recirculation from the beginning. I think if we make minor changes that are kind of in keeping with what we're doing, then ultimately, hopefully it shouldn't be, but that would be ultimately the decision of the law department.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Thank you. We have a motion from Mr. Thompson, second by Mrs. Hoover, to have the first reading. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes.
Ordinance approving the proposed text amendments to Part 11 of the codified ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Ordinance Amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code, relating to various chapters to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, organizing various definitions and terms, processing minor PUD applications, porous pavement, minor accessory equipment structures, townhouses, electric vehicle charging stations, and other related changes.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Moving on to item M2. M2 is the ordinance disapproving the proposed text amendment to Part 11 of the codified ordinance of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Ordinances Amending Part 11 Planning and Zoning Code relating to various chapters to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, organizing various definitions and terms, processing minor PUD applications, forest pavement, minor accessory equipment structures, townhouses, electrical vehicle charging stations, and other related changes. Mr. Thompson?
I would move that we have the first reading of the ordinance.
Excuse me a second. Mr. Gary,
Yes.
did we vote on this one as well, or did we remove this one?
It says the decision of the council as to what to do with it.
Motion by Mr. Thompson. Second? Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Ordinance disapproving the proposed text amendments to Part 11 of the codified ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Ordinance Amending Part 11 Planning and Zoning Code relating to various chapters to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, organizing various definitions and terms, processing minor PUD applications, porous pavement, minor accessory equipment structures, townhouses, electric vehicle charging stations, and other related changes.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Moving on to item M3, a resolution celebrating the month of November 2023 as National Native American Heritage Month in the City of Norwood, Ohio. Ms. Royce.
I would move we suspend the rules and have all three readings and one reading in full.
Motion by Mrs. Royce to suspend the rules and have all three readings, one in its entirety. Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
A resolution celebrating the month of November 2023 as National Native American Heritage Month in the City of Norwood, Ohio. Whereas from November 1 through November 30, 2023, the United States of America will celebrate National Native American Heritage Month. And whereas National Native American Heritage Month is an opportunity to consider and recognize the contributions of Native Americans to the history of the United States. And whereas Native Americans and descendants of the original indigenous inhabitants of what is now the United States of America, and whereas the United States Census Bureau estimated that from 2017 to 2021, there were more than 6,300,000 people of Native American descent in the United States of America. And whereas Native Americans maintain vibrant cultures and traditions and hold a deeply rooted sense of community. And whereas Native Americans have moving stories of tragedy, triumph, and perseverance that need to be shared with future generations. And whereas Native Americans speak and preserve indigenous languages which have contributed to the English language by being used as names of individuals and locations throughout the United States. And whereas the Congress of the United States of America has consistently reaffirmed the support of the United States of tribal self-governance and self-determination and the commitment of the United States to improving the lives of all Native Americans by 1, enhancing health care and law enforcement resources, and 2, improving the housing and socioeconomic status of Native Americans. And whereas the City of Norwood is committed to strengthening the government-to-government relationship that the United States has maintained with the various Indian tribes, and whereas Congress has recognized the contributions of the Iroquois Confederacy and the influence of the Iroquois Confederacy on the Founding Fathers in the drafting of the Constitution of the United States, with the concepts of 1. Freedom of speech, 2. The separation of governmental powers, and 3. The system of checks and balances between the branches of government. And whereas with the enactment of the Native American Heritage Day Act of 2009, Congress, 1. Reaffirmed the government-to-government relationship between the United States and the Native American governments, and 2. Recognized the important contributions of Native Americans to the culture of the United States. And whereas Native Americans have made distinct and important contributions to the United States and the rest of the world in many fields, including the fields of agriculture, medicine, music, language, and art. And whereas Native Americans have distinguished themselves as inventors, entrepreneurs, spiritual leaders, and scholars. And whereas Native Americans have served with honor and distinction in the armed forces of the United States of America and continue to serve in the armed forces in greater numbers per capita than any other group in the United States. And whereas the United States of America has recognized the contributions of the Native American code talkers in World War I and World War II, who used indigenous languages as an unbreakable military code, saving countless lives in the United States. And whereas the people of the United States have reason to honor the great achievements and contributions of Native Americans and their ancestors. Now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the City of Norwood, 1. Recognizes the month of November 2023 as National Native American Heritage Month. 2. Recognizes the Friday after Thanksgiving as Native American Heritage Day in accordance with Section 210 of the Native American Heritage Day Act of 2009. And 3. Urges the people of the United States to observe National Native American Heritage Month and Native American Heritage Day with appropriate programs and activities. 4. Declares November 2023 to be National Native American Heritage Month in Norwood, Ohio, to encourage our residents to learn about and celebrate Native American heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Gears.
A resolution celebrating the month of November 2023 as National Native American Heritage Month in the City of Norwood, Ohio. A resolution celebrating the month of November 2023 as National Native American Heritage Month in the City of Norwood, Ohio.
Ms. Royce.
Thank you, Joe. I would like to motion to pass the resolution.
Motion by Ms. Royce to pass the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
A second?
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members voting aye, the resolution passes. Moving on to item M4, a resolution adopting the 2023 Hamilton County Multi-Hazard Mitigation Plan. Mr. Thompson.
We'll move we suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. May I have a second? Mrs. Franzen.
A second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
A resolution adopting the 2023 Hamilton County Multi-Hazard Mitigation Plan. A resolution adopting the 2023 Hamilton County Multi-Hazard Mitigation Plan. A resolution adopting the 2023 Hamilton County Multi-Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Mr. Thompson.
Move we pass.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to pass the resolution. Mrs. Winterbauer.
A second?
Second by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, resolution passes. Moving on to item M5, ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Thompson.
Move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I second.
Second by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to pass the resolution. May I have a second? I'm sorry, ordinance.
I will instead say, I move that we pass the ordinance, sorry.
Thank you. Motion by Mrs. Franzen. May I have a second? Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Royce. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item M6, resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the general fund, public lands and buildings contractual services 1001-0911-57200 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $10,171.88 and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
We suspend the rules and have all three readings?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer. Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the general fund, public lands and buildings contractual services 1001-0911-57200 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $10,171.88 and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the general fund, public lands and buildings contractual services 1001-0911-57200 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $10,171.88 and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the general fund, public lands and buildings contractual services 1001-0911-57200 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $10,171.88 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Thompson.
Move we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to pass the resolution. Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, resolution passes. Moving on to item M7, resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the Clerk of Council Contractual Services Fund 1001-0200-57200 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $4,806.90 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Thompson.
Move we suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Mr. Kelch,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the Clerk of Council Contractual Services Fund 1001-0200-572000 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $4,806.90 and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the Clerk of Council Contractual Services Fund 1001-0200-572000 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $4,806.90 and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate for the Clerk of Council Contractual Services Fund 1001-0200-572000 to cover the cost of an invoice for Civic Plus LLC for $4,806.90 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Ms. Royce?
I move we pass the resolution.
Motion by Ms. Royce to pass the resolution. Mrs. Franzen?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Any further discussion? Mrs. Hoover?
I'm just a little confused, and I'm not sure who I could get clarity, because I understand that there's both the annual license, but then there's also, I guess I don't understand why there's both the 10,000 and the 4,800.
The first one was the C-Click Fix, and the second one is the
It
Civic
says to cover the
Clerk
cost of an invoice from Civic Plus LLC. Are those two separate?
Yes, they're two. One is, the first one, M6, was C-Click Fix, annual license, and the second one was the
Just Civic Plus?
Civic Clerk Agenda and Minutes Management.
Thank you, appreciate that clarification.
Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the resolution passes. Moving on to item N, administrative reports. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. Couple things going on. We're working on budget submissions, working on the budget, trying to get things squared away. There was a Norwood lateral cleanup here this week. It was an absolute mess, and this is even more of a mess than normal. Clearly, there was some sort of dump or something came out of the back of a truck, and they were picking up stuff shoveling it up because it was so bad. Leaf collection has started. Public Works has started leaf collection. They use leaf vacs that are towed behind the trucks. So if you put your leaves between two cars, they're not going to get picked up. You have to put your leaves, and this is bulk leaves, when you're raking out your leaves from your yard, they need to be in a position where the guys can get to them. So if there are cars parked on top of your leaves, they're not going to get picked up. Typically, the schedule is the day after your garbage day. So if your garbage day is Monday, they're going to be there Tuesday to pick up. So you want to put them out on the weekend. Keep the sticks, keep all that stuff. They're using a big vacuum. It's like a big vacuum cleaner. And if you put a ton of sticks and throw other debris in there, it's not going to go in the machine. It causes problems. So make sure you keep that stuff separated. There are still leaf bags, free leaf bags that you can get from the building department. And those you would, for smaller quantities, you'd put those in leaf bags and just sit them out on your regular trash day, and they will pick them up. So that is ongoing right now. Of course, the leaves aren't down. I still have a ton of leaves on the trees in my house. So they'll be doing it for a while. But please do be aware, there's a process to it. Recently, I was capable of celebrating the 100th anniversary with Mary B. Behan. I didn't study. Mary B. Behan. And Mary Behan is 100 years old, but her daughter was actually somebody who taught me at St. Matthew's at Gressley years ago. It was great to see her and great to see Mary Behan there. They had a little celebration at the firehouse for her and then had a party. The historical home tour I got to attend, I don't know if any of you did, but it was a great tour this time with 3 beautiful, huge homes that are being restored or that were restored that are in absolutely beautiful shape. And then there was the Apple Fest going on after that, and I got to judge a apple pie contest. I actually thought it was an apple pie eating contest because I did one of those in like the 7th grade. You had to hold your hand. I thought, oh, I can beat Mary C at that. But then no, it was actually judging. But it was pretty nice to be the judge of an apple pie contest. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about real quick was that the Athletic Hall of Fame, the Norwood Athletic Hall of Fame, had their induction ceremony recently. So it was interesting, the people that were involved in it. A retired Norwood Fire Department Captain Charles Chuck Fisher was inducted into it. Our previous mechanic at Public Works, Kevin Meinking, who had been with Public Works for years, who recently retired, was inducted into it. Emily Grubb, who is Jim Grubb, who works for our Public Works Department, works in the Water Department, his daughter was inducted into it. And then Robbie McQueen and Derek Alsop. And I think you know the Alsop family from some homebrew or something that they do in their back. I don't want to talk about what they distill in their garage in the backyard or anything, but the Alsop family is a really entrenched great Norwood family, and then Robbie McQueen. So a lot of good people, good connections in there of people that went into the Athletic Hall of Fame. So really, that's all I have. Just some fun stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any questions or comments for the mayor? Mrs. Hoover?
Who won the pie contest?
Who won the pie eating
Which
contest?
was the best pie?
The best pie was it was the only pie that was presented that was warm. So he paid attention, and it was I can't remember the name of his pie or the name.
Savannah pie.
The Savannah pie, and it was a thick,
grandmother's recipe.
and it was delicious. All 4 of them were very good. Don't get me wrong. It was tough because there were some really good pies there, but the Savannah pie, I think it being warm had something to do with it too. Presentation part too, he had it presented really well.
Thank you, sir.
Keep that in mind next year when you. It was a $25 gift card to the Northwood Cidery, which of course the Northwood Cidery is a great place to go, and if you go there to get a Northwood Cidery thing. So that's all I got.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to item O, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business this evening? Mrs. Franzen?
Sure. I figured this might be a good place to talk about this. So I've been trying to keep up on new infrastructure stuff. So a lot of people at some of the festivals I've been going to have been asked about South Jefferson, just because that's been something that we had applied for funding for in the past for street repaving, and it's still, we don't have anything heard back yet, but it is being resubmitted for more funding, just in case anyone's watching. I have a friend who does watch these council meetings who's near South Jefferson, so hopefully he appreciates that. The other thing was I got an update from NOAA, or from the Safety Service Director, about the ongoing Metropolitan Sewer District Elm Avenue issues. They have heard back from MSD, and currently he and Clint are trying to get a meeting with them and a non-MSD engineer to talk about that more. So it's good that we've heard back from MSD, and I'm excited that maybe there'll be some more movement on that project. So that is what I have for unfinished business, I think.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mrs. Winbauer?
Just wanted to touch on some recycling updates that we've been currently discussing in housing, I think. I did the recycling Rumpke tour on Friday, and they had a lunch and learn because they have some new things coming out. But it was a really interesting tour, and anyone can go do a tour of the recycling facility. Just some fun facts. They said less than 15% of what they get actually goes to the landfill. So just seeing their lines and the individuals working on the lines, very efficient and overwhelming, and it was kind of cool. But they're opening a facility in Columbus, a $100 million facility, and at one point they'll shut down Cincinnati's facility to update it so we can recycle clamshells. So that's kind of coming in the next year. But they are starting a new program called with Hefty bags. It's going to be an orange bag, and you can basically kind of put any plastic in there that's not currently recyclable, and then they send it to this company that makes cinder blocks out of it, and they'll use those cinder blocks to build buildings and all kinds of stuff. So So some new things coming from Rumpke. They'll do official rollouts there, but really cool tour. It was fun learning about all of that. And then the just last update on Soil Shop. So if you want to get your soil tested for lead, that is this Saturday at the parking lot at Elman Station from 1 to 3 p.m. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Winbauer. Mrs. Hoover.
I just want to add a little bit to recycling. We have just started spreading the word about recycling. If you've been listening to these council meetings, we're going to be talking about recycling every time, just to keep it fun and interesting. We are starting with trying to encourage all residents to get a red bin if you don't have one already, or if you're ready to upgrade, to get the big honkin' wheeled one. We are already, all residents are eligible to get this. It's already, you're already paying for it, so please use it. I will say again, this helps us in many ways. One, it gets stuff out of the landfill. It diverts things from the landfill, which is good for all of us. Norwood pays for garbage by tonnage, so the less we throw away, the less the city has to pay. And then additionally, we get incentives by tonnage for what we recycle. And that is where we get the yard waste bags that are at the Board of Health, which you can pick up for free, as well as things like the compost bins and park benches. So we really want to see people getting those bins. Less than half of Norwoodians are currently utilizing those, so we can make a pretty big impact pretty quickly. So that is now up on the city website. The Board of Health is having it on their social media with a link to get your bin. If you are a renter, your landlord has to do that. So you can ask your landlord to do that on your behalf. Additionally, businesses can also recycle. So I just sent an updated flyer to the Chamber of Commerce for them to see if they would be willing to distribute it to Norwood businesses. But if you are a Norwood business or you know a Norwood business, you can encourage them to recycle. So that's my recycling chat of the day. For Native American History Month, we're working with the Norwood Library. Unfortunately, Catherine couldn't be here tonight. She's a frequent flyer here at Council. She is going to be doing a storyboard, which she did last year. And what a storyboard is, it's big boards telling the story that will go around the Norwood Mound. And Norwood Mound is our really phenomenal treasure that we have here in Norwood. And the story will be, we are water protectors. So that will be going up November the 1st and will be up for the whole of the month of November. And then finally, update on Neighborhood Watch. We had it on the calendar for tomorrow night. Unfortunately, we have decided, Chief Sumner, Mr. Powers and I decided we're going to push it back into January. We're going to have some new officers on board, which will be super exciting. And we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to get some of those community face visits in, so we'll be able to get them connected. And then we'll be doing Ward 4 in January, and then the additional wards after that. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the Housing Committee. It's out of the Housing, correct?
It might be.
Just reach out to somebody or me, and I'll figure out where you need to go. And that is all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoover. Anyone else? We'll move on to item P. New business. Any new business tonight? Mrs. Frenzen.
I just need to figure out a day for a parks meeting to discuss some stuff going on in the parks. So if those of you who are on that committee have time next week, on Wednesday or Thursday around 6-ish, 5:36.
Wednesday, we have the DEI board at 6, so I could do
that's
after.
true.
And then
Yes.
I could do Thursday, or I could do 7 on Wednesday.
Right. Any
Either
preference?
day.
Okay. I'll say Thursday just because that way there's No issues. I'll double check the schedule before I send out the agenda. But there's a resident, Dia Miller, who is working with some other local residents around Marsh Park and with the Civic Garden Center to potentially look at having some raised beds there. It's kind of just in the planning process, so I figured it'd be good to have them come and just talk to us and see what their ideas were and how that might look at the park. So that's the plan for that. Tentatively, I'm going to say 6 o'clock on Thursday the 2nd. And I will email and let you know when I figure that out with the schedule and with Kamisha, because I have to figure when she's available as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Franson. Any other new business? Great, and we'll move on to item Q, communications. We have several this evening to share. Looks like item Q1, Ohio Division of Liquor Control, recording the new license at Pump Salon Incorporated. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I didn't know if we received any feedback from administration on that. I didn't see anything in my email.
Mrs. Franson.
I believe it was earlier. It was sent about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And the ones I just happened to look at this, and there were no objections from the building department or from the police for this pump salon one.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
So motion to receive and file with no objection?
Motion to receive and file with no objections. Mrs. Franson.
A second.
Second. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. And we have Q 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 from Mayor Victor Schneider are the tree board reappointments and one appointment. Mr. Thompson.
I would move that we receive and file those letters as of read.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file as if read. Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item Q7, Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding a new license at Pure Beauty and Extension Bar.
So there were two objections to this. One from the building department. They say that this business has not applied to the building department to have a business in the city of Norwood. And the Norwood Fire Department said that there's no fire department permit for operation. And in their opinion, would be a change in occupancy at the location should they be given a liquor license.
Mr. Kelch.
I think, Mr. President, make a motion that we file with an objection.
Motion by Mr. Kelch to receive and file with an objection. Mrs. Franzen.
A second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Any further discussion?
May I ask a
Mr. Gary?
question?
Yes, sir.
Would the objection be heard locally? In other words, I would suggest that the council, if there's to be a hearing on the objection, that it be heard locally.
There
So we don't
is,
have to hoof it to Columbus.
correct, there's an option in there for in our county seat.
Mr. Kelch.
I'd like to amend my motion to include that it be held locally.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Kelch.
Mr. Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Mrs. Franzen.
I amend my second to reflect that as well.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Q8, Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding a new license at Aces at Factory 52 LLC. Mr. Kelch.
Make a motion that we receive and file this with no objections.
Motion by Mr. Kelch to receive and file with no objections. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Item R, excuse absent members. May I have a motion to excuse the absent member? Mr. Kelch?
Make a motion that we move to excuse the absent member.
Motion by Mr. Kelch. Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
All members,
Yeah.
all members present, voting aye, the motion passes. May I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Thompson?
Move we adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to adjourn, second by Mr. Kelch. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
All members present, voting aye. Motion passes. We are adjourned.
Getting out of here. That